Hi everyone, my name is Claire and I am the resident blogger at the Darling Apartment, and today I wanted to give you a tutorial on how to make pie crust the way that I make it, and later on I'll also be showing you how to make a honey pie from fresh honey that my friend actually brought me from her family's farm. So please enjoy and let's get started. For this pie crust recipe, you will need 1 1/4 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of salt, 1/3 of a cup of shortening, 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 to 4 tablespoons of ice water, and a pastry cutter. But if you don't have a pastry cutter, forks will do just fine. You start with your flour. Go ahead and put that in the bowl. Add the salt, and then just give it a light mix to break up any flour bits and to mix the salt in. Now we're going to add our butter and shortening. It would be best if this is cold because we want to make sure that the butter stays in little bits while we mix it to give our pie crust that bubbly, airy texture. So I'm gonna mix that in until it gets down to about pea-sized bits. So you may have noticed in my recipe explanation that I don't use any sugar. I do this because I want a salty contrast to the sweet pie filling that you are going to be eating, and the contrast of the two really just is... there are no words. It's gonna get stuck to your pastry cutter, so feel free to peel it off of there. You're ready to move on to your next step when your crust looks something like this. You should have pea-sized bits of shortening and butter in your crust. It shouldn't be very well mixed in because we want to make sure that we keep those separated for that fluffy, crispy texture that you get in a perfect pie crust. Now is the tricky part. We're going to add the ice water, and you really need to be careful so you don't get a really mushy crust out of this. We want to make sure that it's still dry but is only able to just barely stick to itself. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons of water, and we're going to start incorporating that. So you may have noticed that I didn't use a food processor. I think it's really important to be able to get your hands in there and see and feel what the dough is doing without the aid of a machine. It's very important to be able to get it to the right consistency, and that's why I don't use a food processor. Now generally this isn't enough to make your pie crust the texture that you want it to be, so from here you will add 1 tablespoon at a time until it's the right consistency. This is the toughest part to get right, and it takes you a little while to get the hang of it, so don't feel bad if your first pie crust doesn't come out perfect. I still mess them up now, and I've been making pie for a very long time. It should look something like this. It'll have kind of a shaggy texture to it, and when you pick it up, if you press it together, it should be able to hold its form, but it'll still be very dry. So it needs a little bit of time for all of that moisture to really incorporate itself. All you need to do is pour your nice pie crust into this bag. Don't lose any of it. Now just squeeze it together so it forms a ball, and we will form it into a disc to make it easier for rolling later. And then this will go into the fridge for about 1 hour for the moisture and fats to evenly distribute themselves throughout the dough, and then we'll be ready for rolling. So we just pulled our pie crust out of the fridge. It's been in there for a little over an hour. And if you're not ready to use your pie crust right away, it can stay in the fridge for about 24 hours, so don't feel bad if it stays in there for a little longer. You're not gonna hurt it. And this is what we need to see, is this beautiful marbling in here. This is what's going to make a flaky, delicious pie crust. That's all the butter and shortening mixed in throughout the pie. So we want to work on a well-floured surface. Don't want our pie crust to stick to anything. You flour both sides. Let's get a little bit of flour on our rolling pin, and then just start rolling back and forth. And be sure to turn your crust so you roll everything evenly. Don't want a lopsided crust. And it is going to break because it is so cold, and that's fine. You can just smash it back together a little bit. Sometimes it needs a little help. Our pie crust is about 1/8 of an inch thick at this point. That's the ideal length. So what we're going to do is we'll set our rolling pin on the edge here, and then we'll slowly and carefully peel the edge of the pie crust up and around our rolling pin. Just like that. And then we'll just transfer it in like so. Okay, so all of these extra pieces that are hanging over, we don't want to get rid of them. We're going to just push them down to form the crust of our pie. Just that edge piece that you get to save for last. I'll add a little bit more here. If you have any spots that are a little bit on the bare side, you could always add more from other spots that have too much. Okay, so now that everything's pushed down, we're going to make a decorative edge that goes around your pie crust. This is a really easy part. It looks fancy, but it's super easy to do. You're going to take your index finger and thumb on your other hand, and you're going to make little triangles around the edge of your pie, just like that. So, index finger, index and thumb, pinch that down, pinch, and then you just keep going all the way around the pie, making those little triangles. You can make decorative edges in other ways, but this is my go-to. It's very simple and it's quick. And then you have your decorative edge all ready to go. Now, we'll need a fork. I've mentioned this many other times in my blog. And all we need to do is poke holes on the bottom and sides of this pie crust. And all this does is releases any air bubbles that might bubble up during baking and cause the pie crust to push your pie filling out of the way as it bakes. For this pie recipe, you will need 1 pie shell that is prepared, 3/4 of a cup of honey, 1/4 cup of sour cream, 3 eggs, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, a pinch of nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 3/4 of a cup of chopped walnuts. Alright, so we'll take that 3/4 of a cup of honey, and we'll just heat it on medium heat for a little while until it starts to lose some of that sticky viscosity. And it's just a little more liquid. It'll make it easier to work with later. And then turn off your heat and let it cool a little while you prepare the other ingredients. Now we're going to mix together everything else for our pie filling. So we're going to start with 1/4 cup of sour cream, and then 3 eggs, and then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a pinch of nutmeg, and a pinch really is just that, a pinch, and then just a pinch of clove. Okay, we're going to take our whisk and just blend that all together. Make sure that the eggs are fully incorporated with everything else. So everything's mixed together. Should look something like that. So go ahead and add your honey. It should be a little bit cooled just so it doesn't cook your eggs. go ahead and whisk that in. It should look something like that. And then after all that is mixed together, we're just going to add our chopped walnuts, 3/4 of a cup. You can be a little more generous if you want to, but we'll just keep it at 3/4 for this recipe. Just make sure that those are all mixed in, and then we'll be ready to put it in our pie crust. So we have our prepared pie crust here, and all we need to do is pour it right in. And then we're ready to bake. So now we'll put it into an oven at 375, make sure that it's been preheated, and we'll bake it for 40 minutes or until the filling is set. That means that it won't be wavy when you shake it. Now we wait. All right, smells like our pie is done, so let's take a look. It's nice and brown and fluffy, just the way we want it. So we'll just set this on a rack and let it cool to room temperature, and then we'll be ready to eat. Thank you for joining me. My name is Claire, and I am your resident blogger at the Darling Apartment.